Welcome, everyone, to Homemade Baby and Toddler Food, Safe Purees and Snacks. Today's master food preservers are I'm Robin Barker and I'm your MC. Jill MacArthur is our Q&A moderator, and we have Joy Ahrens and Kirsten Hansen as our panelists. This program is being recorded and will be posted on our website. And also, a link to a handout with recipes for this class will be provided to attendees when they submit the post-class survey, which is going to pop up at the end of the class or when you leave the Zoom. Little Zoom housekeeping. Please keep your mics muted when not speaking. During live questions, unmute and speak or raise your Zoom hand, and we will have you will see a question mark come up on your screen, and that's the best time for you to address your questions orally. You can answer, I'll get to that in a minute. Actually, to do that, you raise your hand by pushing on the React button and selecting the raise hand in the menu that pops up. At any time, you can type questions or comments in the Zoom Q&A feature. You can open this from the menu bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you don't see Q&A on your bar, click More, and it'll pop up a menu, and at the top of that menu is Q&A. Again, during their open discussion, and we'll have at least 2 opportunities, you'll see it indicated by a question mark, then you can speak up. Who are we? The UC MFP Online Delivery Program is a community outreach, online-based, grant-funded, volunteer program within the University of California Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources. We provide up-to-date, research-based information on food safety and preservation. Our mission is to keep Californians safe and well as they use culturally appropriate, research-based practices to safely preserve food in the home, reducing food waste, increasing food security, and providing engaging ways for Californians to explore healthy food. We won't read all of this fine print, but just emphasize that we are all volunteers. We cannot speak for the University of California, and we do not endorse or oppose any specific organization, service, or product. So, for example, if we show a specific piece of equipment, we are not endorsing that specific product or brand. As ever, whenever you do work in the kitchen, especially if you're doing preservation, you want to clean your work area and any surfaces that you may touch, even those you don't automatically think of, like, your phone. You want to tie back your hair, wear an apron, and wash your hands. You'll gather together your utensils and recipe, your ingredients, and you'll, of course, want to wash your produce. We have a little disclaimer today. The food ideas we are presenting today are suitable for most infants and toddlers, but every child develops at their own pace. So check with your pediatrician to make sure your little one is ready for these foods. This class is going to focus on safe food preservation for babies and toddlers, because making your own baby and toddler food can be safe, time efficient, space efficient, and economical. Preserving foods for young children may have different requirements, though, than preserving foods for the general family. Now, we want to emphasize that the master food preserver volunteers are not nutritionists, but we are lucky to be joined today by 2 registered dietitians with expertise in child and family nutrition. Our program today is starting with best food safety practices. We're going to move then to the role of salt and sugar in food preservation. We have a dehydrating section with sections for baby food and toddler food. And then we move to freezing baby food. And finally, snacks for toddlers. So our first section is best food safety practices, and we start with Joy. And so hit it, Joy.
Thank you, Robin. Next slide, please. Good morning, everyone. My name is Joy Ahrens, and not only am I a UC Master Food Preserver, but I'm also a registered dietitian nutritionist for the WIC program. WIC is a federally funded supplemental nutrition program for pregnant and postpartum women, infants, and children under the age of 5 years old. The food safety tips that I will review with you over the next two slides are consistent with the education that we provide at WIC and is supported by the U.S. Department of Agriculture Food and Nutrition Services. So let's start with food safety guidelines for infants. When it's time for your baby to start solid foods, you want to introduce new foods just one at a time. Wait 3 to 5 days before you introduce another new food. This gap gives you time to observe for any allergic reactions. Next, do not give your baby honey in the first year. This is because honey may contain spores that cause botulism. Infants are at higher risk for botulism because their digestive tract is still immature. And lastly, do not feed your baby from the baby food container and then save it. This is because the baby's saliva will contaminate the food. Instead, transfer the food from the container to a dish. Whatever is not eaten from the dish will need to be discarded. And the opened food container can be stored in the refrigerator for up to 2 days. Next slide, please. Okay. Next are some food safety guidelines for toddlers age 1 to 3 years of age. The following foods are not recommended for young children because they are associated with choking. So that would be nuts, whole grapes, popcorn, hot dogs, hard candies, raw hard vegetables, and chunks of peanut butter. Always supervise your children when they're eating. Keep your meal times calm. Cut up food into small pieces. Have children sit down when they're eating. Children should never be running, walking, playing, or lying down when they have food in their mouths. So those are some guidelines for babies and toddlers. And now I will turn it over to Kirsten.
Thank you, Joy. So I'm going to talk about the role of salt and sugar in food preservation. Next slide, please. So what I want to highlight here is that salt and sugar are preservatives. They help keep food good for longer storage. Um, so you see on the photo on this screen is of some salt preserved lemons. I make them every year. They're delicious. And the reason that they're safe is because salt and sugar affect the safety, food texture, and shelf life of preserved foods. So sugar acts as a preservative by binding the of free water in preserved food so that food spoilage microorganisms, which generally like moist environments, can't multiply. Um, Salt chemically binds with water, which also inhibits the growth of food spoilage bacteria. So the changing the quantity of salt or sugar in a recipe can lead to unsafe foods because you could get food spoilage or lower quality products. So, for example, lowering the quantity of sugar in a jam recipe not only could compromise safety, but also because it is important in forming the gel formation in a jam, could actually lead to a jam that doesn't gel at all, and then you have just a delicious sauce rather than the jam that you are looking for. And as I mentioned with the preserved lemons, they're just lemons and lemon juice, which is acidic, and salt, which inhibits the growth of microorganisms. So they're a safe product because they are high in acid, which means they're low in pH, and they're very salty, which inhibits microorganisms. The tricky part for home food preservation for babies and toddlers is that they should consume less salt and sugar than older children and adults. So all of your delicious salty pickles, all of your sugary jams, not so great to feed infants and toddlers. However, drying, also known as dehydrating, and freezing are methods of food preservation that don't rely on salt and sugar for safety and are therefore great for babies and toddlers. So drying removes moisture from food, and as I already said, food spoilage microorganisms rely on moisture to multiply. So by taking the water out, you're making the food safe for longer. And freezing makes it too cold for organisms to multiply. So you're going to basically stop any growth that will make you sick in its tracks. And so those are great methods that we're going to talk about today. Next slide, please. And at this point, I would like to invite you to submit any questions that you have about this first section with food safety, or about feeding babies and toddlers in particular. You can put your question in the Q&A or you can raise your hand. And I will ask our Q&A moderator, Jill, if she has any questions that she'd like to share.
Actually, I do have one question, and someone would like to know if it's possible to receive a certificate of completion to put toward their adoption continuing ed hours. So that may be something for Michelle.
Yes, and so that's a great question. If you're a master food preserver and want to use this for your continuing education, you don't need a certificate. Just note that you've completed this class. Otherwise, the master food preservers are designed to provide education to the public. We do not provide professional development information, and therefore we do not have a certificate of completion that can be used for professional reasons. But if you do have the receipt from their registration to use to show that you attended the class, and we do appreciate your participation here today.
One more question about the recording. When will it be available and where can we get it?
The recording should be available within the next few days. After we complete this recording, we will do a little bit of editing and then it will be posted on the statewide UC Master Food Preserver site. You can look under events and then you will see a tab for previously recorded events and you'll find it there.
All right, that seemed to be it for questions. Oh, wait, one more. Can I share the recipe link with someone else?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you everyone. And for sharing the recipe link, what happens is you just get a link to a PDF after the class is over, and you are more than welcome to share it with anyone and anyone that you would like. Bring it anywhere. We love to share our resources. So I'm going to talk first about dehydrating baby food. And you see here on the screen a photo of the dehydrator that I used, now lovingly stored at a friend's house, because the reason we're doing this whole class is because I had a baby. And when I announced this to the master food preservers, everyone's first reaction was, well, we're doing a class about baby food, right? And so that's how this class started. And I'm really grateful to my friend for helping me with this project. Next slide, please. So, in terms I'm going to talk first about general guidelines for fruit and vegetable leathers, because what we're going to be doing is creating basically dried fruit purees that we can then rehydrate and feed to infants. So, The general guideline for making a fruit or vegetable leather is to make a fruit or vegetable puree by cooking cut up fruit or vegetables until soft and then pureeing it. It's possible to make purees by simply blending raw fruits or raw vegetables, but when we're cooking for infants, we really want to be careful about food spoilage, even if we can't see it, and really controlling spoilage microorganisms. So the safest bet is to peel your fruit or vegetables, wash it well, peel it, cut it into chunks, cook it to kill any organisms that are in there, and then turn it into a puree and dehydrate it. And a general guideline is that 2 cups of fruit equals a 13 by 15 fruit leather. So you can do your math on how much you want to make. Once you have your puree, which you can do by processing with an immersion blender, if you're old school like me, you might have a food mill, you might use a food processor, anything that gets you a nice smooth puree. Spread your puree evenly onto a tray for drying, about a 1/4 inch thick. And you can dry purees either in a dehydrator or in your oven. For oven drying, you want to cover a baking sheet with a silicone mat or with plastic wrap. You can use plastic wrap because you're drying at very low temperatures. But if you have a silicone mat available, it's a great option here. And if you're using a dehydrator, you want to cover your dehydrator tray with silicone mats or again with plastic wrap, so that your puree doesn't drip through your tray. Um, I know for some dehydrators that are round, specific silicone inserts are actually sold for those, so that's an option. Or of course, use plastic wrap. And then you're going to dry your leathers at 140 degrees. For a dehydrator, this takes about 6 to 8 hours. And for an oven, it takes up to 18 hours. Ovens are a little trickier because they're not really designed for drying. So dehydrators work not just by being warm, but by actually having fans that remove the moisture from inside. Ovens generally don't do that. So it takes longer because you aren't as removing the moisture from the environment as efficiently. And also they're often not designed to go down to really low temperatures. So you may need to keep an eye on the temperature, prop the oven door open with a wooden spoon to keep the temperature low. You just need to keep an eye on the leather a little bit more, but it's totally doable. And you'll note here that I have photos of some fruit leather. The first thing to note is that it sure does say 12 hours at 120 degrees. That is because my wonderful friend actually dried these leathers for me when I was in the throes of figuring out how to feed my still young baby and doing everything else in life. And she had never made fruit leathers before, so she dried them at a lower temperature for longer, which worked just great. The moisture still came out. And you'll notice that it's actually more like apple shards rather than apple leather. And that's because when you're eating when you're eating fruit leathers as a snack, you want them to be pliable and a little bit chewy. When you're dehydrating for infants, because you're going to be rehydrating before feeding, you can really just keep going and really suck all of the moisture out of your leather beyond the point where you'd necessarily want to eat it as a snack. Um, and this is nice because it helps with long-term food preservation. The less moisture you have in something, the less microorganisms you can will want to grow on it, and food spoilage is stalled. And it's nice because it takes up less room and less storage space. Next slide, please. And then in terms of using and storing your dehydrated food, you want to rehydrate it before feeding it, as I mentioned. Dehydrated fruit leathers plus warm water is a really convenient option for busy evenings when you're on the go. Unlike containers of wet food, leather doesn't spill, it doesn't get all over everything. You could just have a small container of fruit leathers and either bring some warm water with you in a thermos bottle or get warm water wherever you're going and rehydrate. The other nice thing is that you can add as much or as little water is appropriate. So if you're feeding a younger baby, you'll want a thinner puree. If you're feeding an older child baby, or even a toddler, giving them a snack of applesauce, you can add less water. I'll also note that these rehydrated purees are great for adding into other foods, like baby cereals or even oatmeal to sweeten it a little bit for a slightly older baby or toddler. In terms of storage considerations and safety, consider the texture of the final puree if you're planning to feed this as one of the first foods to a young baby who's still learning how to eat. Um, a food mill that can get the food very fine may be helpful, or you can puree it even with just an immersion blender and then strain it through a mesh strainer to make sure that you're catching any chunks. Fruit and vegetable leathers can be stored for 1 month at room temperature or for up to a year in the freezer. And the full directions for storage are in the recipe handout that we'll be sending you after this class. And some examples. Here we just have a very simple applesauce. Great first food for babies, great for toddlers, great for adults. Honestly, I sort of feel like most folks like applesauce. If you're planning on feeding it to a toddler, you could even add a little bit of cinnamon. Um, Other fruit or vegetable purees are great. I have some, apple and peach. Apples tend to be super helpful because they really help the fine texture of the final product and they tend to be sweet. So if you're not planning to add additional sugar, they're a great option to add with other fruits. So apples and peaches is wonderful, a great use for frozen peach slices. Apple and strawberry, especially a great way to store those very quick to spoil spring strawberries, is fabulous. Um, and if you can buy a puree in a baby food jar, you can probably make it at home and dehydrate it um, yourself. Next slide, please.
The next slide is for the next section. Did you want to
Yes,
stop
and
the share?
yep, I actually am going to very quickly. Here we go. Thank you. I'm just going to, there we go. Okay. Hello, everyone. Here is my very glamorous study where I have stored myself during this class so you don't hear my child screaming in the background. And we're going to do a quick demo so you can actually see the rehydration process. So these are some of the very cool little apple shards that I've got, and I have my teapot full of hot water here. I'm trying to make sure you can see, so I'm just adding a little bit of water. And you'll notice, here we go. Nope. Sorry, everyone. You'll notice that this isn't rehydrating immediately. It'll take a few minutes with warm water. But we'll do the next section and you'll notice I'm just sort of, oh, you can't see. I'm so sorry, everyone. There we go. Tilting the tray there towards the camera. There we go. Um, you'll notice that it will rehydrate. So we'll do the next section and then I'll bring you back to see there we go, the rehydrated final product, because right now it sort of just looks like leaves of apple mush, but believe it or not, it really will rehydrate to fully edible baby puree, which is kind of amazing. And I will turn it back to Robin to talk about dehydrating food for toddlers.
Okay, next we're going to talk about dehydrating toddler food. Next slide, please. Okay, so as toddlers grow, their food options will expand, and it's a great time to start introducing them to more family foods and flavors. And dehydrated foods can be helpful and flexible to just do that. They allow you to prepare meals ahead of time and offer familiar ingredients in new convenient forms. Think simple options like dried cauliflower, a rice cereal, refried beans or rice and beans, or even mild low sodium backpacking style meals adapted for your little ones. In the handout that you'll get later after you complete the evaluation, there'll be a recipe for dehydrating and rehydrating cauliflower rice cereal and refried beans and rice and beans. And when using dehydrated food for toddlers, texture is key. Always rehydrate foods thoroughly so that they're soft and easy to chew. Avoid anything that's too tough, crunchy, or sticky, because that could pose a choking risk. And safety is also important. Make sure you store it properly in an airtight container, label it, and use it within the recommended time frames. And when reheating or rehydrating, ensure that it reaches a safe temperature. And with a little planning, dehydrated foods can make it easier to share family meals while supporting your toddler's growing independence and curiosity about food. Next slide. So with that, we will take any questions. You can raise your hand, unmute yourself, or type your questions in the Q&A.
Okay, we have a question. What is a safe temperature when rehydrating?
I would use like hot water when rehydrating, and then make sure that it's the consistency that you want, and make sure that it's cooled down, that your toddler it won't burn them. But yeah, I would use hot water to rehydrate it.
We had a question earlier. Someone asked if they normally don't start with hot water. Would it be all right to use cold water and then cook it up to the temperature that you want and let it cool a little?
Um, yeah, I think that would be okay. I mean, the whole point of dehydrating it is, to have the convenience. So certainly if you're at home and you have access to that. Um, but I think if you're like away from home using this as a food for your child, I would start with hot water. But yeah, if you do cold and then heat it up, I think that would be okay too.
Yeah, it's not really a food safety issue. It just if the cooler your water is, the longer it will take to rehydrate the food. So that's just something to bear in mind. And then um, just use the general practices that if you're feeding warm food to an infant or toddler, test it on the back of your hand, make sure it's a comfortable texture before feeding. You could even start with very warm or hot water and then add a little bit of cold water if you need to cool it off. And this is a great time to show the consistency of the applesauce. So before it was just shards with a little bit of with water around the side. Thank you for spotlighting me. And now you can see it has rehydrated. I would actually probably add a little bit more water or let it sit for longer because it's still a little bit lumpy. But as you can see, this was extremely dried and now it's more or less just normal applesauce again. Um, and there we go. You can see it. There we go. And so, yeah, it's delicious. It was made with fairly sweet apples, so this does not have anything added. It really, truly is just apple puree. And now that my baby is practically an eating pro because he's been eating for 3 months now, I might actually add a tiny bit of cinnamon to this to start getting him used to other flavors, or add it to cereals, things like that for him.
Okay, we have another question. How can you tell if you haven't preserved it well other than the obvious signs? So if your preservation process didn't really work properly, um, what are signs of that other than mold or something along those lines?
I believe if you fold it and it sticks to itself, then you need to dry it a little bit longer. If it doesn't stick to itself, then it's good.
Yeah, and one of the really nice things, I think you might be thinking of canning, where we warn people a lot that the spoilage microorganisms that you get in canning, things like C. botulinum and even listeria, are odorless, colorless, you can't see them, they hide in your food. The really nice thing about freezing and dehydrating, especially dehydrating, is that typically if something has gone wrong, you'll be able to see it visually or smell it. So we're really looking for more traditional molds. If there's any sort of off scents, any kind of mold. You also can look for excess moisture in the storage container. You want to make sure that your dehydrated foods aren't leading to condensation, because that's another indicator, like Joyce said, where it's sticking together. Condensation in the storage container indicates that you maybe didn't dry it long enough. But as I said, one of the nice things about dehydration is that typically, if something's gone wrong with your dehydrated food, it's much more obvious than with canning.
Okay. Are there any more questions, Jill? Do we want to move to the next section?
Not at this moment. Jerry, did you feel that your water temperature question was answered correctly in terms of starting with cold and cooking the food up to a proper temp? Was that clear for you? You can answer in the Q&A if you want, but otherwise you can just speak up.
I think, Alexa, do you have a comment about this? I think it was a question
Yeah.
about the safety of warm tap water.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm happy to answer that aloud. I just put it in the chat, but it is not recommended to drink warm or hot tap water just because it spends time sitting in your water heater. And that can lead to opportunities for contamination either by increased lead or sometimes bacteria. So especially when considering that you're preparing it for an infant or a child, using cold water and heating it up is definitely the best practice. And, that can still be done on the go, for convenience if you keep it in like a little carafe or something like that to keep warm when you're on the go or a thermos.
And we do have one more question. What percentage of the original nutrients will be retained of the dehydrated food or in the dehydrated food? I think that's for Alexa or Joy, honestly. Once it's rehydrated, I believe is where we're pointing.
Yeah, I would say most of it, but I don't know the percentage. I don't know if you know, Alexa.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm with you, Joy. I believe that actually varies from food to food. Some foods actually, like certain nutrients, will become more bioavailable when they're cooked and then preserved, and certain nutrients will be lost. So it is very food specific, but I think you're still getting a lot of great benefits, including all of that fiber, and a lot of the nutrients are well preserved with dehydration.
Yeah, and just a comment that, assuming that you're not feeding your child like dehydrated foods all the time, we're offering this topic as a convenience when maybe you leave your house, so we're assuming that you're feeding your child fresh foods most of the times that, having these dehydrated foods, even if there's a loss of nutrients, is still okay. And it's still way better than getting convenience food when you're on the go.
All right, one more question. This one is about breast milk, and in some of the recipes it does say you can add cold breast milk. What do you think of preserving breast milk? There are companies that do it, and I'm wondering if it's possible to do it as an individual.
At WIC with breast milk, we recommend just freezing it. So, in using like milk storage bags, which are like thicker, meant for the freezer. So I'm not sure what those companies do to it. If are they making it shelf stable? I'm not aware of it, but we instruct our participants to just freeze it in milk storage bags.
Okay, another question. When you peel foods, or can you leave the peels and incorporate those in the purees? I would think that infants, you peel it, but as toddlers get older, they can handle more. Or can they handle more?
So I can address this from sort of a food safety perspective to begin with. Um, the reason we're saying peel the foods is not just for textural reasons, which you may be thinking of, but because food spoilage microorganisms live on the outsides of foods. And so you're washing your produce well, but especially when we're thinking about infants whose immune systems are and gut are still developing, you want to take the peel off so that you're really, really cutting down on any opportunity for microbes that you don't want introduced into their diet. Um, when you're thinking about toddlers, you could potentially start thinking about leaving the peel on as long as you're able to puree it enough. But for best food safety, you probably still want to remove it. And I think probably thinking about saving the peel because I know that's where a lot of the nutrients tend to live. So I'll ask Joy and Alexa for their thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think what you said, if they puree it long enough, where the texture isn't an issue, definitely the peels, add some extra nutrients, extra fiber.
And we have one last comment. You were asking Joy about what the companies did to breast milk, and they make it into a powder.
Ah, yeah, I don't think I don't, from home preservation methods, there's things in our home that we can't do that you can find industrially. So, yeah, just for us as individuals, I would just freeze it. I'm not aware of a method to turn breast milk into a powder at home. Yeah, they have access to equipment that we don't have.
And that seems to be it for questions today.
So now I'm going to talk about freezing baby food, which is a little bit apropos given that we were just talking about freezing breast milk. Um, and as a reminder, freezing is a great food storage mechanism because it basically stops the growth of microorganisms. It doesn't kill them. Heat is required to kill them, but it means that they can't grow beyond tolerable, safe levels in your freezer, which is great. Um, A quick reminder of safe freezing methods. Whatever kind of freezer you have, whether it's a chest freezer or just a small freezer on top of your refrigerator or underneath your refrigerator, you want to make sure it remains as close to zero as possible, ideally zero. In the Food Master Food Preserver program, we suggest having a thermometer inside of your freezer, or we call it the sacrificial popsicle, wherein you just keep a popsicle in a bag in your freezer, um, and you can keep an eye on it. So if your freezer dies, you can look at the popsicle and see how much things thawed out before the freezer restarted. And if your popsicle has completely melted, then you need to be concerned about the quality of your food. Um, in terms of other freezing methods, foods that are stored in the door as the door closes and opens are going to go through the freeze thaw cycle more, which decreases quality and potentially compromises food safety. So anytime you're storing baby food or indeed freezing breast milk, you want to put it inside the freezer, not on the door. Um, and in terms of portioning and packaging for frozen baby food, you want to think in small portions. Babies and toddlers eat little amounts of food, and as Joy talked about earlier, you aren't able to store any food that you've already dipped your baby's spoon into beyond that feeding session. So to decrease food wastage, you want to think small portions. Silicone ice cube trays or mini muffin tins, again, silicone, are very easy and convenient. They're about the right size. You can pop out the food once it's frozen and then store it in airtight bags or freezer safe glass or plastic containers once it's frozen for individual portions. And you want to remember the food expands when it's freezing. So you want to make sure that you're leaving room in whatever you're freezing the food in for it to expand. Um, in terms of storage and quality, homemade baby food can be stored for up to 3 months in the freezer, and you want to discard any unused food after 3 months. So think sort of bearing in mind how much food your baby might eat in that time period just to decrease food wastage. Um, and then when you're ready to eat it, you or feed your baby, you want to thaw in the refrigerator if you're thinking ahead and have time. You can thaw in the microwave if you're going to be feeding immediately and make sure to stir it very, very well afterwards to avoid hot spots that can burn your child. Or you can thaw at room temperature in a pan of cool water. Whenever we're thawing food or indeed heating food, storing food, we want to think about the food danger zone, which is the temperatures between which microorganisms and bacteria can grow rapidly, which is 40 degrees to 140 degrees. So you want to keep foods stored for a longer term below 40 degrees and then feed your toddler or infant soon after you've brought that food up to room temperature to decrease the amount of time that food spoilage microorganisms can grow in it. Next slide, please. In terms of frozen food ideas, anything that you can dehydrate, you can freeze. So if you're thinking either that you don't have a dehydrator, it seems like an awful lot. I sure would love to be able to just pop some ice cubes in my freezer. This is for you. Also, things that you may not want to dehydrate or which can be riskier to dehydrate. So purees that incorporate meat such as chicken, so chicken and wild rice is a great idea, pureed as appropriate for your child, as well as purees that incorporate rice and beans, although you can also dehydrate those, and you'll get that in our recipe handout. So things like refried beans, dal, chana dal that's blended, are all great options as well, especially for older babies and toddlers who are starting to eat family foods. And again, much like with dehydrated foods, you can add water to food when it comes out of the freezer if it needs to be a thinner puree. Next slide, please. And before we move on to snacks for toddlers, we're actually going to just do a very short little demo of storing food in those silicone ice cube trays and putting it in a longer term storage bag with Robin. Thank you, Robin.
Okay. I'm gonna try to, oh, thanks. That way I don't have to spotlight myself. So what Kirsten was talking about was this silicon tray. And this silicon tray, one thing I like about it, or one thing you need to remember about using them is this comes with a handy dandy lid, but when you freeze, if it doesn't come with a lid, you're going to want to cover it up to make sure that it stops it from, if you forget about it and leave it there, stop it from drying out, but more so, being contaminated by anything else that's going on in your freezer. So I take the top off and you'll see it looks a little weird. This frozen items I have in here, these are actually egg whites. I don't have a toddler in my home. I use these for making cocktails and mocktails. One of the things I do like about the silicone type tray is that it is easy to pop out any of the cubes. Now one thing I like about this size tray is it is about 2 tablespoons. So actually, if I did have a toddler, this is a great size. Now it will take about 2 tablespoons, but that's not the amount of liquid that you'll want to put in the tray because it is going to expand. And you can see that the egg whites expanded a little peculiarly, but egg whites are a little peculiar. So once they freeze, you can take them out so you can reuse your silicone tray and you can pop it into a storage container And I would, in order to keep its best quality, remove as much air as possible from the container. You can dip into a bowl of water, and that will get rid of a lot of the air. And then, of course, you want to label it. And I have whites here with the date. If the baby food does, remember, you don't want to keep it in the freezer for longer than 3 months. Is there anything I forgot to, Kirsten?
That's great. Thank you very much. That was a really nice demo. Thank you, Robin.
Okay, and I'm going to back to sharing the screen.
Okay.
And now we're going to go to Joy for snacks.
Yes, our last topic, snacks for toddlers. Next slide, please. Okay, with toddler snacks, you have a wide range of options between dehydrating and freezing. So one, you could do frozen yogurt bites or yogurt bark. So for like a yogurt drop, you could take yogurt that's already has the fruit in it and then do like little drops on your baking sheet, preferably with like either parchment paper or the silicone mat or wax paper, little like bite-sized drops and then freeze it. Or you could do plain yogurt and add your own fruit puree or even like freeze-dried fruit, like you can like blend that and mix that in. Or you could do like a yogurt bark. Start with either like plain yogurt or vanilla yogurt. Spread that on the baking sheet, and then add like sliced fruit. Optional if you want to add granola. Freeze it for about 3 to 4 hours, and then break it up into like bark-like pieces. So perfect for the warm weather that's coming up. Toddlers still like applesauce or other purees. In the picture, I believe that's butternut squash. So you can serve that. Older toddlers, you can have them serve them fruit leather, but cut them kind of small and then supervise them when they're eating. Dehydrated fruits like apple rings, like in the picture, dried banana slices or dried blueberries. In the handout you'll get, you'll have instructions of how to do the dehydrated fruit. Just keep in mind the banana slices, they're going to be chewy. So if you're used to the banana slices that you get in the store where they're like crunchy, um, you know, um, they use industrial methods to get that, but the when we dehydrate at home, we can't get it to that crispy unless you like freeze dry it. So it's going to be like chewy, but it's still delicious. And then tofu jerky. It's a great way to offer protein to your toddler. The recipe will be in the handout. It's a lot softer, easier to chew than like a beef jerky, but a great source of protein. And then freezing is a great way to offer snacks to your toddler, especially for baked goods like mini muffins. In the handout, we've included a recipe for monkey muffins, which are basically banana muffins. And so you would bake it as usual, then make sure you cool it down to room temperature, and then pop it in the freezer in a single layer for maybe like 1 or 2 hours until it's frozen, and then put it in your freezer storage bag, trying to remove as much air as possible. And then when you want a money muffin, either can defrost it in the refrigerator overnight, or try to defrost it at room temperature, not more than 2 hours. Or you can microwave it, like 15 seconds is good. And then just make sure that it's cooled down, that it doesn't burn your toddler's mouth. So those are some great options for toddler snacks. Next slide. Okay, with that, what questions do you have? You can raise your hand or type in the Q&A.
We do have a question. Um, this was a question about a thermometer and the temperatures you were giving were in Fahrenheit or centigrade, and Fahrenheit is what all the temperatures are that are in this presentation. The question is, I have a high-low thermometer and my freezer runs from 12 to 17 degrees Fahrenheit. I thought 20 degrees Fahrenheit was okay. So is that an okay temperature for a freezer?
No. You want to get as close to zero as possible. If it's below zero, that's okay, but
Okay, I made a mistake there.
oh,
It
minus
runs
12.
from
Okay.
negative 12. Yeah, 12
Yeah,
below.
minus
Sorry.
12
Jerry,
is
my
safe.
apologies. All right.
Yeah. It just might take it longer for you to defrost stuff, but yeah, minus 12 is perfectly fine.
And then in terms of going up to 17 degrees, I'd be interested to know if this is, so it sounds like you might have a freezer that's cycling. You might also, depending upon where the thermometer is, it may be warming up when you're opening the door and then refreezing. So I might experiment with thermometer placement. And yeah, what you want is 0 degrees, but realistically, if you're, opening the door, you're introducing warmer air. I would also say this might be a case for a really wonderful sacrificial popsicle to keep an eye on whether anything in your freezer is starting to defrost, which is a real food safety issue. You don't want things defrosting and then refreezing, um, as that compromises both safety and quality. So I would say in this case, a little bit more exploration is required, and sort of playing around with placement of that thermometer. I'd be particularly concerned, I think, if this is a chest freezer, since those are really designed for longer term storage, designed to stay colder. Somewhat less concerned if this is a smaller freezer that's on top or underneath a refrigerator, since those are more likely to be opened more frequently and just come get a little bit warmer.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple more questions. What are your thoughts on freezing baked goods on the second day in the fridge?
I think that would be okay. I mean, baked goods in general can be kept outside at room temperature. So yeah, as long as you're not like freezing it when it's still hot, because you don't want to stick like super hot stuff in your freezer.
Okay, and another question. How safe is the usage of silicone material used in food storage? Does silicone leach any chemical or microplastics after a certain temperature?
So I don't have specific knowledge of this, but my general understanding, and I'll certainly defer to any of my other fellow MFPs, but my understanding is typically um, heating is more of a concern for plastics than for cooling. So certainly if you're doing any freezing, um, and the temperatures at which you are dehydrating are quite low. It's 140 degrees. So typically, that's going to be quite safe. But I'll certainly defer to any of my other MFPs to see if they've done specific research into this.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think you're correct about it's safer when it's, freezing than, warmed up.
So that's going to take some more research, I guess, and that is our last question.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to if you have a food preservation question, that silicon question is something that you can come back and see us at our monthly Ask a Master Food Preserver Zoom hour. It's on the second Wednesday of each month from 7 to 8 o'clock. So we are going to be meeting this upcoming Wednesday. So I look forward to seeing you there. And you can also submit a question to our helpline using the QR code or the link here. And please sign up for our monthly newsletter, Save a Season. Its little icon is kind of moved over here over the R, but it leaves the link open with the QR code. And please like us on Facebook. We're at UCMFP. or follow us on Instagram. And our name is a little bit different here. It's at UC Master Food Preserver Program. We've got 3 upcoming events for getting informed about all of our upcoming events. You can follow us on Eventbrite. And here is the QR code for Eventbrite. On next Tuesday, we have preserving cherries at home, dehydration, pickling, and canning. And I'm going to be presenting on pickling, so I'm hoping to see you there. And here is our Ask a Master Food Preserver session on May 13th, which is next Wednesday. And then on the 19th, we have freeze drying fundamentals from family meals to sweet treats. Now you'll see here we were asked about our past class recordings. There's a QR code here to lead you into the area where you can access past class recordings. This class is just about over, so it will be a past class recording in a few days once we complete a little bit of editing. Now we have a favor to ask you. We need your input. We want to make these classes as useful as possible for the community at large. So when you leave this Zoom, you're going to get a brief survey that's going to pop up in your browser. And it may take a second or two, so please wait. Please complete it to help us improve. And when you submit, a pop-up acknowledgement is going to include a link to the class handout with recipes and tips. And thank you for your time and interest, and happy preserving.
And we will stop the recording and end this class. Thank you so much, everyone.